The play on the field, the court, and the ice is just one part of sports. Behind every game are the people hard at work so we can enjoy the action. They're the owners, administrators, agents, broadcasters, and vendors who bring the games to life. Meet them when you go Behind the Game with Patrick Klinger and Dave Boden.
Welcome to Behind the Game, presented by Blaze Credit Union. I'm Patrick Klinger, president of Agile Marketing Partners. Alongside me, a man who's available for NIL deals, but isn't finding any takers. He's the president of Blaze Credit Union, Dave Boden.
Thank you, Patrick.
Dave,
sort of.
normally I'd be wearing a sports jacket or blazer today, but in honor of our guest, I thought I'd break out my Golden Gopher gear.
That's fantastic.
I thought maybe you would too.
I love it. I don't have any Gopher gear, but I could easily wear some of my array of Wisconsin Badger Rose Bowl sweatshirts, if that would be helpful. But thanks for that introduction. I am available for NIL. I had a great jump shot when I was in high school. So our guest today is Jeremiah Carter, Senior Associate Athletic Director for NIL Policy and Risk Management at the University of Minnesota, and welcome to the show today. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And you got a lot more of a background and bio than that. I gave you the short version, but tell us a little bit about your journey. Started, in a sense, as a walk-on member of the football team at the U, to now a senior position in the athletic department. Kind of how did you get there and get from that starting point to where you are now?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. It's, despite sitting this close to a Badger, we're all good. We'll figure it out. I moved to Minnesota when I was in high school. I went to St. Paul Central, played football at St. Paul Central, and had an opportunity to come across the river and play for Glenn Mason and his staff. Frankly, it was hard to choose from my, single offer for a walk-on at the Division I level. So many choices. I decided if they're going to give me a chance, I'll give it a shot, right? Managed to find myself really in the right program at the right time as we were building. Glenn Mason and his staff really did a great job. I got there 1 year after the new coaching staff in 1998, and in my time there, our program went from one that had not been to a bowl game since I believe 1987 was the last time we'd gone to a bowl game, to really one where we had a reliable team year in, year out. Started off as a walk-on offensive lineman, got bigger, got older, and worked my way into a position. Ended up being a 2-year starter there. Was able to be an All Big Ten player my senior year. And then afterwards, I had an opportunity to come back and coach. And it was something that at the time, I loved the game of college football. And more than that, I loved college athletics. And if that was my opportunity to be a part of college athletics moving forward, that's the one I was going to take. Coached there for a couple of years, and then had an opportunity to actually go to the NCAA in Indianapolis and work there at the national headquarters. Worked there for about 6 years, and then had an opportunity to come back to the University of Minnesota, and I've been back now for about 10 years, actually going on 11 years. Really enjoyed my time there.
Great.
In your position at the University of Minnesota, you are seeing firsthand how collegiate athletics is changing and how quickly it's changing. When you were a college athlete, maybe the best you could hope for was a scholarship. Now, name, image, and likeness is making a lot of collegiate athletes wealthy. For those people who don't know what NIL is, could you give us a little bit of a rudimentary lesson in it?
Sure, yeah. So, name, image, and likeness is a very short history lesson. Up until 2021, NCAA rules prohibited student athletes from using their name, image, their likeness, their appearance from promoting a commercial product in any way. So before I got into my current role, I was the director of compliance, so making sure that we were meeting NCAA rules. And with that, the way that I would explain that to student athletes is, hey, you can work at McDonald's, But as soon as McDonald's wants to put you on a billboard or use your social media to promote McDonald's, then you've moved into name, image, and likeness in some way, and that was against NCAA rules. The NCAA that was deregulated in July 1st of 2021, and it has evolved very, very quickly over time, really transformed the way that college athletics has worked. Part of the resistance for a long time from a rules perspective for deregulating name, image, and likeness was the concern that very early on, boosters or others would involve themselves and start using something like that as a recruiting inducement, right? Trying to convince a player to come to a particular school for money. And that has been, that traditionally has been something that is just not a part of college athletics. That is changing rapidly, and now we're at a point where name, image, and likeness is one of, not the only factor, but one of the central factors in some sports, in student athletes making their decision about whether or not they're going to stay at an institution or transfer to an institution, or enroll as out of high school. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It has been completely transformative.
So it's interesting. So the name, image, and likeness is one element that's really, as you say, caused a transformation. I think it goes in some ways hand in hand with another significant development, and that is the kind of the startup of the transfer portal.
Yeah.
And the ability for athletes to move pretty freely between institutions, even within the rules, but pretty often within there. So tell us, how does the transfer portal itself work?
Yeah. So the transfer portal, it has it seems like a very futuristic sounding name, right? You enter the portal and
beam across to somewhere else.
It is simply really a mechanism for student athletes to be able to essentially notify other schools that they are interested in transferring and planning to transfer. The NCAA rules do have some limits around when that can happen in a given year. So every sport has what are called windows, where a student athlete is allowed to put their name into the portal during that time to indicate that they are interested in transferring. And if it's outside of one of those windows, they're not able to put their name in at that time. But I think that the transfer portal has been with us for a few years, but really what has changed is the rules around eligibility after you transfer. For a very, very long time, it was in a couple of sports, football, men's basketball, women's basketball primarily, it was if you transfer as an undergraduate student, you have to sit out a year. You have to wait for a year. And the first year of the transfer portal, that was still the rule. It has now changed to the point where it's evolved twice in that time. First, it was you can transfer one time and be immediately eligible, but then you have to sit out a second time. But now we are at a point. The most recent change to NCAA rules allows student athletes to transfer really an unlimited number of times as long as they are meeting academic requirements at their new school to be able to compete immediately. And honestly, that was always the reasoning behind sitting out a year. Was you transfer from one school to another, it's going to set you back from a graduation standpoint. So take that year and focus on classes and and being better focused on being a student. Where we're at now, where it's just if you go in and you're eligible, you can compete, and that's makes sense.
It seemed that when NIL first came into existence, there was an expectation of a quid pro quo, that a sponsor would support an athlete, and that athlete would then in turn provide social media posts, community appearances, a variety of different things. Does that still happen, or is there less of that and more of an expectation of just go out and play?
Yeah. Speaking broadly, does that expectation still exist? Absolutely. Every school is going to be a little bit different, and this is the NCAA has been around for 100 plus years. Not every school follows the NCAA rules in the same way. Minnesota has been my experience, and I know that at Minnesota we do things the right way. That's an important part of what Mark Coyle speaks about, and frankly, it's the expectation of our community, right? Is that we're doing things the right way, and so I can speak to Minnesota. At Minnesota, yes, student athletes are working for what they get from an NIL perspective. Whether it's always a commercial company that is paying them, or in some cases it's a fan group that's paying them, or it's a booster that's being involved, they're still working for it, but it's not necessarily what you would think of as traditional. Nike pays LeBron James a lot of money because Nike knows that LeBron James is going to make them a lot of money. I would say that we're not always there from a payback return on investment standpoint right now, because part of it is, that boosters understanding that if that student athlete is at our institution, we are going to be a more competitive team. But they're still working for it. That's absolutely part of it.
So with the idea that maybe it's not literally play for pay, but with that connection,
Yep.
Nick Saban, obviously a legendary football coach at Alabama, he left his job, pretty much at the top as he said, the transfer portal and NIL dealings had made his role very difficult. And Ole Miss coach Lane Kiffin said the transfer portal was turning college players into mercenaries, which is kind of a harsh way to say it, but what are your thoughts about that viewpoint, and then how coaches, and maybe particularly in your experience here in Minnesota, adapt to this or can adapt to this new reality?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm going to be my best to be measured in my response as a former football player, former coach. Hearing Nick Saban talk about how much harder his job has become, it's because he lost his competitive advantage. His competitive advantage was, I offer at Alabama the best opportunity to go professional, and that's the best offer that a player can get.
Yep.
When programs and collectives, third parties, started being able to offer something more than that, Alabama and Nick Saban were no longer able to just select the best players in the country and say, you get to come to Alabama. So yeah, his job got harder, but the rest of the country, the coaching staffs at the rest of the country always had to work really, really hard to recruit and retain the best players. I'm not saying that, the head coach at the University of Minnesota, PJ Fleck's job, has it gotten harder? It's still really, really hard, right? Because that's,
it's always been hard.
That's right. Yeah, it still is hard, which is what makes which is what makes a program like Minnesota, when we do see success with our football program, with our basketball programs, the amount of effort that it takes to get there is significant, because we don't have a lot of the built-in advantages that you would maybe see at other institutions.
So just a quick follow to that.
Sure.
So it always has been hard, and the elements to recruit have needed to be there, whatever they are. Now it's maybe opportunities through NIL, and you can transfer. But how about on the back end side of that, the retention side? Now, I mean, there are differences now in what and how often and for what reason somebody can leave.
Yeah.
And so now you maybe have to fight a lot harder to retain
Sure.
your athletes.
Yeah. So from the start with NIL, the conversation with our coaches has been, first and foremost, at Minnesota, right? We are not going to have the biggest budget. We are not going to have the biggest NIL budget. Those things are not going to change, right? You look at the top 20 budgets in college athletics. All of those schools have two things in common. It's not conference, it's not area of the country. They have a football stadium that seats 75,000 or more, and they sell out. Top to bottom, that's it. Wisconsin's in there because they sell out Camp Randall, right? Iowa's in there because they sell out Iowa, right? The top of the list are the Texases and the Alabamas and the Michigans and the Ohio States because they have hundreds, they have 70 to 100,000 fans that show up every Saturday that there's a home game, and that drives a massive amount of revenue. You can't really make that up with sponsorships, right? You can't make that up with giving. That's a large gap. So for us at Minnesota to be successful, we have to have our coaches recruit student athletes that want to be at Minnesota. That has to be the primary, that has to be the first motivating factor. If they don't want to be at Minnesota, right? We've all lived here through a couple of Januaries. There's no amount of money in the world in NIL dollars. There might be enough, but it's not going to keep them here. We need student athletes that understand what it means to be at the University of Minnesota, understand what our community expectations are, understand what our academic expectations are, right? If we do that first and foremost, then it is our responsibility, frankly, as an administration, as a community, to make sure that the resources are there for them to have a really top-notch student-athlete experience, including access to NIL opportunities.
And to follow up on that, the fact that the basketball program, the men's basketball program, has lost a number of players recently.
Yeah.
Would you suggest that maybe they were not the right recruits for Minnesota because they came in and they pretty quickly jumped to another program?
Sure. Yeah. No, I appreciate you bringing that up. Obviously, very topical based on where we're at, right? So what I would respond with is the second half of what I said was, once we get them here, it's our responsibility as a community to make sure that those resources are here for them, right? There is no reason to leave the University of Minnesota. If we don't do that, then we haven't given them all of those reasons to stay. And it's something that, frankly, as a former student athlete, right, as somebody who has been in college athletics a long time and seen a lot of student athletes through the University of Minnesota, some of them have made it all the way through to a degree, some of them have not. There's always more that we can, continue to support them with. And NIL has become one of those things. I am not, unfortunately, the narrative has taken to blaming student athletes, right? Where's the loyalty, right? And I will tell you that there are absolutely student athletes who are making decisions that are not first and foremost financial decisions. I will tell you, I will point to, somebody like Dawson Garcia. He is going to be one of the better players, not just in the Big Ten Conference, but in the entire country next year. The opportunities that he had to leave the University of Minnesota, both last year and this year, were not insignificant. But he chose to stay because he has been at multiple institutions and he knows overall that the experience at the University of Minnesota is the experience he wants as a student athlete, and that's great. I would challenge anybody who's saying, where's the loyalty, where are these things? Frankly, at the numbers that we are talking about, in some of these cases, if somebody came to you and said, hey, I know you love Blaze Credit Union, right? And you've been there a long time and you've built up what they've done, we are going to pay you 2 times or 3 times your salary to do the same exact job next year.
Are you asking me that?
I don't have
Or-
that kind of funding
okay.
or credit
All right,
union.
just wanted to see.
But what would your response
Right, everybody
be?
would.
Yeah,
Right,
and
you
that's
can't blame somebody for taking that.
correct.
opportunity.
And it's I understand how challenging it is. I am first and foremost a fan of Gopher athletics, right? And that is, I'm a fan of Gopher athletics, and I'm a fan of college sports. And it's hard. I get that. It's hard. It is going to be. But at the same time, I don't begrudge any student athlete for taking an opportunity that puts them and their family, because that's the type of money that we're talking about at our level. It puts them and their family in a completely transformational position for 1 year or for 2 years. I can't get upset about that.
Of course. So kind of building on that, there's incentive for players at the highest end of a team potentially to leave because there are people that'll be out there offering a lot because they're really good and they're moving on. And maybe another kind of flip side of that is you've got players that aren't cracking the starting lineup and they're not getting the court time they need, and the transfer portal lets them also look out to move. Maybe they're not going to get the big offers, but they're looking for playing time, right?
Sure.
And you were an athlete. You came from being a walk-on. You didn't have the luxury of having that opportunity. You had to work, I'm guessing, really hard to get where you got to, right? And so the question is kind of from an athletic side or from your athlete's perspective, does this create an environment where the athletes are not really learning to deal with adversity or to say the response to that is to buckle down and work harder, but rather just I'm going to look for the next opportunity?
So I would say this generally. Student athletes transfer for lots of reasons. Students transfer for lots of reasons, right?
Right, and nobody sees that. I mean, nobody knows that part, right?
Correct,
Or sees
right?
it.
I happen to be, young. I stepped foot on campus at the University of Minnesota as a 17-year-old, right? The person that walked onto campus at 17 and the person that left campus at 22 were not the same people, right? I wasn't the same person 2 years later at 19. I credit the University of Minnesota and I credit that coaching staff for transforming me, helping me transform into the person that I was going to become. But going there at 17, I had no idea what a reasonable expectation, what it was going to be like. And when a student comes to campus and is there and decides this isn't the right fit for me, right? This coach, this isn't the right fit for me. This program isn't the right fit for me. Maybe, from a talent evaluation standpoint, when I was recruited, I thought I was a certain level player, right? Now, I had the flip side experience. I felt that I was a Division I player. Most of the country did not agree, no matter how many times I sent them my cassette, right? But the University of Minnesota said, we'll give you a shot, right? So I felt that I was a Division I player, a high major Big Ten player, and I was committed to finding out. And I did. I could have gotten there, and it was close, my first or second year, where I was like, yeah, maybe I'm not, right? Maybe everybody was right, and I wasn't, right? But I did stick with it. But there are some student athletes who say, you know what, I thought I was this level player, and I'm not. And I only have 4 years to play. So, why wouldn't I find something that's the right mix of school and social life and athletics and playing that's right for me? And I absolutely support, student athletes being able to do that.
Yeah, that's great.
Jeremiah, the athletic department still needs to raise funds for facilities, for non-revenue sports, for recruiting. How are you balancing the need to raise those funds with also encouraging donors to support NIL.
Yeah, it's a challenge, right? Because as you laid out, I can't think of any of the coaches in the 22 sports that we have who ever end the year and say, I got too much money in my budget. Why don't you take some back, right? Because they are all competing at the highest level and are really competitive people. Everybody working in sports is a really competitive person because that's the drive, that's what we get, right? And we work really hard at it. So a lot of those needs aren't going away, but at the same time, as we looking forward in college athletics as an institution, we need to continue to evaluate what we are doing, what we are spending money on, and what is going to put us in the best position for that upcoming year and then in the future, right? 5 years ago, facilities were the most important thing we could possibly do, right? There's a quote from Mike Loxley, who's the head football coach at Maryland. I think it was back this fall. He said, you know what, facilities used to be important. I got guys that'll get dressed in a trash can if we're paying them $20,000, right? Yeah. And that shifted very, very quickly. So we just, we have to consistently evaluate where we're spending our money and what the most important things for us are.
Terrific. We're down to the last couple of minutes, so
since we're down to our last couple of minutes, but let's turn back to the University of Minnesota. So you've got this environment with NIL and different funding. You've got the transfer portal active. The Minnesota sports program has honestly probably not achieved the consistent level of championship success that they wanted for some time.
Sure.
Even with some exceptions, but how do you feel that this can impact truly the University of Minnesota and Gopher athletics?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad that you asked it because we have a lot of people in our community, honestly, internally, right, externally, who are mourning the loss of college athletics as they've known it, right? If you're a lifelong Gopher fan, why? College athletics, if you're a football fan, you're a basketball fan, we don't have a Big Ten championship banner hanging in our facilities that has gone up there in the last 50 years. The status quo has not been friendly to us. We need to find a way to be innovative and grow our opportunities. And having the same exact rules that we've had the last 50 years hasn't worked.
That's a great point.
So let's take advantage of this.
Yeah, terrific. Jeremiah, what a fascinating conversation. Best wishes to you as you sort of navigate this brave new world of college athletics. It's seemingly changing by the day. Yeah. Dave, thank you as always for joining me and co-hosting. Thank you all for watching Behind the Game. We'll see you again next month.